I'd like to call the Housing Subcommittee to order. Roll call, please, Mr. Clerk.
Chairman Yem?
Yes.
Council Drinkwater?
Here.
Council New?
Here.
3 present.
I also want to recognize Councillor Mercier in the in the chamber as well. Let me turn over to Ms. Christine McCall to give us an update on MBTA Community Multifamily Guys, please.
Thank you, Councillor Yem. Through you to the rest of the subcommittee and to the other councillors present. My name is Christine McCall. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Director of the Department of Planning and Development, and I am joined tonight by 2 members of the senior staff of DPD, Camilo Espatia, who's our Chief Design Planner, and Fran Sigliano, who's our Senior Planner. And we are here tonight to present an update on the MBTA Communities draft multifamily zoning requirement guidelines. And so just to quickly go over the agenda, we'll just do a background of the legislation. We'll go review the draft guidelines, sort of talk about the impact to Lowell, key dates so that we remain in compliance with these new guidelines, and what we're doing as a department as we move forward. So with that, I'll give it over to Fran, the Senior Planner, to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So in January 2021, the Economic Development Bill included a new section 3A within Mass General Law Chapter 40A, the Zoning Act, that requires that what are considered MBTA communities create at least one or possess at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing, 3 or more unit housing, is permitted as of right and meets other criteria set forth in the statute. This criteria includes having a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, being within a half mile of a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, or bus station. In Lowell, we have a commuter rail station. Does not have any age restrictions and is suitable for families with children. The reason that this is important is because communities that are not compliant with this legislation will be ineligible for important state funding sources, including MassWorks grants, Housing Choice grants, and local capital funds, projects funds. So the next slide includes a map showing MBTA communities. The darkest blue being subway or light rail communities, the mid-tone blue being bus communities. Commuter rail communities are the dark green, so Lowell is a commuter rail community, and then light green is MBTA adjacent communities. There is a section within this new legislation that requires that the Department of Housing and Community Development, in consultation with the MBTA and Department of Transportation, develop guidelines that provide clarity to this legislation for communities. That includes what it means to permit multifamily housing as of right, what is a district of reasonable size, how to determine if a multifamily district has a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, the suitability for families with children and not having age restrictions, and then the extent to which MBTA communities have flexibility to choose the location of that multifamily district. And they issued draft guidance on December 15th, 2021. The following slides discuss some of that guidance. With respect to as of right, that means that the multifamily housing would be allowed without the need to obtain any discretionary permits or approval. Discretionary permits include special permits and variances. So those are permits where a land use board can approve it or deny it at their discretion. Site plan review is allowed, however, it can regulate circulation and things related to the site, like landscaping, lighting, snow storage, things of that nature, but it may not be used to deny a project that is allowed as of right.
Excellent.
The next category is reasonable size. So by reasonable size, they mean multifamily districts that are at least 50 acres. which is approximately 1/10 of an area within a half mile of a transit station. Overlay districts are allowed, but within the overlay district, it needs to be at least 25 contiguous acres of land, and no portion of the district within an overlay district that is less than 5 contiguous acres of land can count toward the minimum size requirements. The minimum multifamily unit capacity discusses how a reasonable sized multifamily district must also be able to accommodate a reasonable number of multifamily housing units as a right. A compliant district's multifamily unit capacity must be equal to or greater than a specified percentage of the total number of housing units within the community. The required percentage will depend on the type of transit service in the community as follows. So this is a capacity discussion. So 15% of the total housing stock in Lowell, for example, within this district must be multifamily, 15%. But that is not a mandate or like a quota that needs to be met. It's just with respect to the capacity to have that much housing.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what
Sure.
Fran was saying, is that while we are required to have a minimum of 15% in this district, it's not a housing production goal. It's just what needs to be allowed within the zoning. And so right now, we are not compliant in that way, so that is something we'll be working towards.
Yes. And like I mentioned earlier, any communities that are not in compliance with this section 3A will not be eligible for funds from the following grant programs: the Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, and MassWorks grants. These are grants that we've obtained before. And then in terms of deadlines for compliance, by May 2nd, 2022, we are required to submit an MBTA Community Information Form to DHCD and hold a briefing of the City Council on the draft compliance guidelines that I just summarized. By March 31st, 2023, each MBTA community must provide DHCD with a proposed action plan and timeline for any planning studies or community outreach activities it intends to undertake in order to adopt a multifamily district that complies with Section 3A. And by December 31st, 2023, an MBTA community must adopt the zoning amendment by the date specified in the action plan and timeline approved by DHCD. And then with respect to next steps, at the end of 2021, the city received a grant from Mass Development to create a transit-oriented development plan within a half-mile radius of the Gallagher Station. In January 2022, DPD released an RFP inviting qualified consultants, and on January 24th, a consultant was selected. So we're working with Stantec to kick off the project right now. The goals of this plan are to enhance the regional and local significance of the city, engage the community in the conversation and have plenty of community outreach, promote revenue-generating commercial and high-density residential land uses in close proximity to the station, encourage alternative transportation options, open space and entertainment, recreational amenities. This plan will help us to understand market conditions for development and assess our current zoning and its effect on development. At the end of this process, the consultant will draft zoning ordinances that will be presented to the council for final approval. So that's all we had. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the detailed explanation, and that's what my question, but you already answered as far as the next step, because we want to be, in for the grant. So any question that you may have, my colleagues, Vesna, Councillor Noon, Councillor Drinkwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the presentation. Very informative. I did have one question with respect to the percentage of housing that has to be allowed within the district. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. So we have in front of us a map of the existing zoning districts, I believe within, this probably represents a half mile within the commuter rail station. I believe it was said that currently we don't meet the percentage threshold that is required in the Mbta Communities law, which would, I guess, be 15% of multifamily units as a percent of total housing stock. So to come into compliance with the MBTA Community Act, I know we have to allow multifamily housing by right, which is currently by special permit. To address the percentage threshold, does that mean essentially we just have to expand the size of the districts? I'm just trying to understand how we would, like, are they not currently big enough to allow that much housing, or how is that goal met?
No, that's a very fair question. So the way they're categorizing the district is what's within a half mile of the commuter rail station. So this snapshot, it's give or take, it's about a half mile around the station, but we really wanted to highlight all the different zoning districts that are there, and none of these are compliant because none of these allow more than 3 units by right, which makes us non-compliant by the new guidelines. So, but what we're doing with the TOD plan is we actually want to create a new district, transit-oriented development overlay, and so that it wouldn't change the underlying zoning of UMU, TMF, neighborhood business, TTF, because those changes in those districts impact throughout the city, and they may have detrimental effects on a different neighborhood. So we really want to focus on a TOD overlay, which would be new zoning, new requirements that would sort of supersede in terms of permitting for residential units. And that's what we're going to work out with the consultant, which we're hoping to kick off within a few weeks. We're just working out the contracting. And then we're actually hoping, the contract is set to expire at the end of June, so that this summer we'll actually have draft overlay district language to start discussing with the council. Yeah. But that is currently our intent.
Thank you. And I will say, I mean, I think this is all very good, very positive for the development of affordable housing and meeting the city's transit-oriented development goals. I know it's something that we're required to do by virtue of state legislation, but I do think is a great opportunity for the council to engage in this process and make sure that we are making Lowell attractive and making sure that we're giving our residents transportation options and housing options to accommodate working families within the city. So I look forward to engaging in the process, and I think it's great that it aligns with with the consultant coming on to work on the TOD plan. So once again, thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah. Councilor Noon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Francisca, for the presentation, as well as the whole team. Very thorough. And so the questions, Councilor Drinkwater asked a question about the map, the layout, and indicated that roughly approximated half a mile radius from the train station. Currently, we not meet the 15% threshold, not meet by way of we don't have those multi-unit as number required. Is that correct?
No, we haven't done the evaluation of whether or not we currently meet 15% of that district in multifamily, because as we all know, there's a number of non-conforming multifamily housing units in the city. Right. Because we did, amend our zoning in 2004, and then I think in 2008 we made it a little bit more stricter. So that is something that we will evaluate and have to evaluate, and that's separate from having an underlying zoning that allows more than 3 units to be developed by right, rather than through a special permit process, which even in our downtown right now, if you want to redevelop 3 units, you need to go get a special permit.
We at this stage now that we do the draft, and then what's the next stage? Could you give us the process as to to meet the requirement, and what happens should we not meet the requirement? Will that impact not just the city, or will it impact just the city or the nonprofit that customary receiving grant from state through housings or workforce housing, or mass workforce and so on? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure, that's a great question, and it is sort of the driving force behind this. I will say we appreciate that the the chair of the subcommittee called this meeting. So one of the requirements is just to brief the council
Yeah.
before May, which we consider the informational that we did a few weeks ago, and I think this presentation more than meets that briefing. And then obviously our public outreach is part of our TOD plan. But I think what's really important that if we don't follow the dates laid out for compliance, which is an action plan submitted by 2023, and then implementation and adoption of zoning by the end of 2023, we will no longer be eligible for MassWorks. And for context, just in the last 8 months alone, we were awarded $3 million in MassWorks grants.
Yeah.
We will no longer be eligible for Housing Choice Initiative grants. In the last 2 cycles, the city has received the maximum award. So in the last 3 years, we've received $500,000 in that. The grant money that we got to support this TOD program, which is $75,000 to hire a consultant, we'll no longer be eligible for that. And then DHCD did put a caveat on that said, you know, DHCD may, in its discretion, take non-compliance into consideration when making other discretionary grant awards. And we are not the only entity in the city that applies to DHCD for discretionary grants. So that this could have a larger impact that we don't quite know, whether it's our nonprofit partners or other organizations or other folks in the city.
I just wanted to note that there are communities who choose not to proceed with this. They don't see sometimes the benefit, or they don't want the density. So really the main reason for us to do this is, and kind of the ancillary reason is to comply with this, but the main reason is to understand whether we can develop around the station, taking advantage of the train station as a major hub, not only for Boston, but communities around us. And so the idea is that we may be already compliant with the 15%, but it may not be immediately around the station. So really the main reason for us, the way we're looking at it as a planning department, is understanding why development has not happened at the rate it should around a train station. Just wanted to point that out.
Okay.
So if you round up the last few years through MassWorks and Capital Project Fund, Housing Choice, all those, the last 3 years, if you add them all up, for the city award by all those entities, roughly close to maybe 10 million.
That would be correct.
Yeah.
So if we are not compliant by, let's say, it's just by deadline of 2024, we will not get those money.
Correct.
But not only that, from what I hear you saying, that the other, the nonprofit organizations, or including the low housings that are receiving the grant from DHCD, may or may not be also eligible because the city itself does not does not comply with the Mbta community program.
That's a strong possibility. DHCD reserves the right to take noncompliance into consideration when scoring grant applications to their, so that could include more grants, and then it could include other programs.
Why are they doing it now?
Well, I think, you know, there is a housing crisis. I think we can all agree with that, both, you know, nationally, not just here in Lowell and not just in Massachusetts. The cost of construction, the cost of affordable construction has ballooned. But I think zoning is hyper-local, and the state, I think, recognizing that every community is different, that they needed to take action to sort of motivate municipalities to start thinking more thoughtfully and more critically about how to create more units within their own communities. And I think they focused on transit because I think it's also really important that we not only build more housing, but we build more walkable communities. You know, every person becomes a pedestrian once they get out of their car, but we also, you know, a healthy, thriving community has many options for people to get around, whether it's by bike, by bicycle, by walking, running, scooters, however they want to get around. And so I think, and that's also more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
And that being the city, we did just invest, what, $15–20 million in redoing the Lord Overpass to make sure that it was a multimodal connector from the transit station to the downtown. So I think there is an opportunity to think about housing, but to think about how we move as a community and how do we stay a sustainable community and a healthy community. And so it's coupling the two together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Drinkwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to just go back to something you had said, Ms. McCall, that I know we're kind of focused on the area surrounding the Gallagher terminal in this conversation, but I believe you just said that even in the downtown district that multifamily housing is not allowed by right. Is that correct?
That is correct. Any housing development in the downtown mixed-use zoning district over 3 requires a special permit, I believe with the zoning board, in addition to design review with the historic board.
Is there any zoning district where multifamily is allowed by right?
Not in law.
No.
No, not in law.
I mean, I think it's good that this conversation, this topic has kicked off this conversation. I think certainly you just made a really good case for why it's important that we address this near transit. But I think certainly in other districts, our downtown certainly, if not within the half-mile radius, certainly close in an important district for the city and close to transit. And I hope we can look at, we're being prompted to look at our transit-oriented development to make sure it makes sense and make sure it's creating housing options for our residents. But I think it makes sense to evaluate, all of our zoning districts and for those that do allow multifamily housing to make sure we're not putting up any unnecessary roadblocks to create the housing that we need. I know it's been a topic of this council to talk about downtown, particularly upper floor redevelopment and trying to find ways to encourage that. Potentially the need for a special permit to develop housing could be working counter to that goal. So as we take on this discussion, particularly around the Mbta Community Act, I think it's a good idea to broaden it slightly to look at it in other areas of the city as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Mercier?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the price of gas keeps going up, you will see a lot more walkers than you ever saw before, and I may be one of them myself. Right. But I want to say, how did you know about this requirement, this new requirement? Did someone notify you? Was it the state? How did you know that?
Yeah, we were notified by DHCD and the Housing and Economic Development Department, and I will say they've done a really great job of communicating with municipalities and hosting a lot of info sessions and Zoom webinars where we can go on and ask questions.
Well, we're very fortunate in this city to have the right people in place, namely the 3 people that are here this evening, because wouldn't you realize that if you lost all this money, so you're like grant writers yourself to be able to do what we were required to do. Some people just say, oh, it's probably not important, let's just pass it off. But you're right on the ball, and we're very pleased about that. Thank you so much. I also would have liked to have made a suggestion that when you presented all the zoning map with the zoning things like NB or RR, OP, SMU, if you could have put aside of that what that stood for. Do you know what I mean? Because
future mapping, I think we'll definitely absolutely do. I will admit, this was a last-minute printout on my part, just for context, so there isn't a legend. Yeah. But I am happy to explain them if anyone has questions. But I do think you're right. I think especially when we're doing the community outreach, we'll absolutely do that.
Yeah, that'd be nice to know. Single 2-family, single family, 2-family zone. People don't understand. This is like saying LOL, laugh out loud. We don't know all these things, so that would be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great job, too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Noon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could also, update the council, the progress make and where you at and stuff like that too, without us asking for a report. That way we know. And sometimes we forget.
Sure.
So, okay.
We will commit to keeping the council apprised, especially when we have our kickoff community meeting with the consultant, and we'll keep you apprised. And then of those dates, and then as reports, and then we can plan at the end of in the summer or beginning of fall, because I know summer's a vacation time, to come back and present what the findings were and sort of what the community feedback is and how to move forward.
Thank you.
Zoning is complicated, it's going to take time, so.
Yeah. I just have a quick questions regarding the timeline. I know you have the timeline here, May 2nd, and then March 31st, 2013, then December 31st, 2023. When, if you could break down as far as when the community input meeting will be, and when the deadline to submit the application to the state, so we all kind of know what the deadline is. And that's the first question. Second question I have would be, you talk about the zoning overlay. If we could, like Councilor Drinkwater was talking about, overlay can be extended to the downtown, so this way the upper floor can be developed into the housing unit by rights, without having to have special permit. Yeah, I'm not sure it's within that half-mile radius, but I don't know. We can just, you know.
So, to your timeline question,
Yes.
we're hoping within the month we'll finish the contracting with the consultant and be able to launch a community meeting. So there will be I can't remember what we put in our request for proposals, but there'll be a number of community meetings
Right.
about the TOD overlay from now until the end of June.
Right.
And then in the larger context of this, I think after that's done, we'll come back to the city council and say, here's the feedback that we've received.
Yeah.
These meetings are advertised, and so there can be a discussion. We can either do more community outreach if you feel like there hasn't been enough or there's folks missing from the table, or we can, depending on what we're asking our consultants to do is to draft actual zoning.
Yep.
So we can refer that right away to
Sure.
the planning board for review and recommendation and
Right.
vote on it.
Right.
And that can happen. These are the deadlines to stay compliant, but we can move much faster if we
Yes,
want to. And
yes.
so I think if there's positive community engagement during the TOD
Right.
consultant process, I think we could do it. And then your other question about downtown, I completely agree. I think we can separate, I think we could put forth an amendment to the zoning code about the number of units allowed by right in the DMU, which is the downtown mixed use zoning district, separately from the TOD overlay. We could just say, Councilor Noon, Councilor Mercier, both of you, the entire subcommittee has filed motions specifically about revitalizing downtown, and I think that could be something we do
Okay.
separate and faster.
Right. Okay.
And so we could put that together for consideration without a consultant. I think that's something that we could probably, maybe Fran unofficially could start discussing with the
Yeah.
planning board.
Yes.
And then that's something we could present back to the council.
That would be helpful. And lastly, we have a number of housing community group right now in the city of Lowell, and they could be part of the community input because they have been meeting already, including the nonprofits and all of that is already involved. So they could be part of the community input,
Yeah.
since they involved in it already. So.
That's a great suggestion. I'm glad you brought that up. The Housing Coalition, which the DPD played a role in the creation of by endorsing an application made by CTI to CHAPA for this technical
Yes.
assistance.
Yep.
And right now, DPD and CTI are really taking the lead in organizing, but hopefully, we really do want that to be a community-driven process. And so we do have a meeting next week. I believe it's at 5:30. There is going to be a presentation by Fran and by Camilo on the built environment and sort of the challenges to constructing affordable housing, and some of the, and so zoning will definitely be part of that discussion.
Yeah.
And then I envision the DPD will continue no longer to be an organizing party of the Housing Coalition, but we will be present at every meeting providing updates. And so we would make sure that that group knew about community
Yes.
meetings, knew about council meetings, knew about planning board meetings where
Right.
these things were being discussed.
Yes. Councilor Drinkwater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if a motion was necessary to request the report from DPD about the potential for either expanding or creating an additional overlay district into the DMU district to allow multifamily housing by right, but I'll place that in the form of a motion so that we can get a report on that back to this subcommittee.
I second it.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Clerk, Mr. Clerk, it's a motion. Could you repeat the motion again so Mr. Clerk can hear?
The motion was to request a report from DPD to the subcommittee on the possibility of expanding or creating an overlay district in the downtown for additional housing.
Okay. All right. Roll call, Mr. Clerk, right?
Chairman Yam,
Yes.
Council Drinkwater,
Yes.
Council Noon.
Yes.
3 yeas.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you so much for a great presentation, and I'm excited. And I think it's critical because, you know, otherwise we're going to lose all these grants that we would have got without being compliant. So I appreciate it, and we probably get together again and talk more. Thank you so much. And somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman,